The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Welcome in, everybody. It's time for another edition of our weekly visit on Need to Know. I'm Keefer. Glad that you're on board, and we've got a lot to talk about with the election looming. And I have a little bit different way of approaching the subject matter today that I hope will be effective because I want to start off by saying that this is not just another U.S. presidential election in the year 2024. This, to me, is probably, and they say at every election, so I don't want to get into that bucket of saying this is the most consequential election ever. That's said every 4 years. But this time, it's not just an election between two, what I'll call largely unpopular candidates in different factions of the country. It is that we had the classic South Park, the great spoof show that's been on Comedy Central for so long. Of course, it's a show that no one or nothing is immune to being poked holes in fun with. The Parker and Stone, the guys that are the conceivers of South Park and other Broadway plays and productions, movies. These guys do an amazing job, and probably my favorite episode ever on South Park was one where the PETA people came in, the ethical treatment of animals, and told the school that the guys attended, the characters on the show, Cartman and the others, that their name of their mascot was offensive. They are the South Park Cows, of course, and that it needed to be changed. As we've seen a lot of nicknames of schools and athletic programs change to this new era. My favorite is Stanford, because for many years was called the Indians because of Jim Thorpe, and had to change their name to the Cardinal, not the bird, the color, and their logo is a tree. That's really something to get fired up about. You know, go trees. Anyway, this is not really the subject matter, but I think it's a good preface, because that episode, when PETA ordered and pressured the school to bow to the public pressure that they were putting on, that these cows was offensive to cows and it needed to be changed. The students, in a bit of a protest just to show the nonsensity of that decision, had two nominations for the new nickname of the South Park Elementary School mascot. And the two nominees were the giant douche against the turd sandwich. Those were the two new mascot nominees, giant douche and turd sandwich. And the episode is about the campaign, the people on either side supporting one or the other candidate, the arguments they have, the nonsensity of having such a ridiculous choice and not having the best ideas or the brightest notions of what your school should be represented by. They even had a debate. A couple of guys dressed up. I guess it was guys. Maybe they were the real entities, but it was a turd sandwich and a giant douche. And one guy, Kyle, decided that he didn't like the choices, so he declared he wasn't going to vote. And the episode was about the outrage of everyone else, no matter who they supported, telling him he absolutely had to vote. And his voice was, I don't support either one of these. I refuse to participate. I think it's an interesting thing, because since then we've had several elections between turd sandwiches and giant douches. I'll let you decide who's who in this election. but you have a situation where this is a lot more than the turd sandwich and the giant douche. This election is a philosophical one. This election is an existential one. This election has to do with making a selection of a direction that this country is going to go. And don't be fooled by the rhetoric or people that you know that say, well, it's just cyclical. This is just politics. The Republicans and Democrats, they go around and have their high points and low points, their ups and their downs. This is not politics as usual, folks, because if you haven't been paying attention, I'm going to remind you here that what we have going on in our country right now is a situation where there is a absolutely cohesive effort to transform this country into something that it was not founded to be. In fact, transforming the country into something that the people, the forefathers, the founders, the people who forged this great experiment called America, purposely tried to make sure never, ever happen by their drafting of the United States Constitution, which is the backbone of our government of the people, by the people, for the people, which was a experiment that a lot of people scoffed at. People of the time, that there has to be in these people's mind some elite class that is in charge, not the run-of-the-mill citizens. That is an absolutely appalling prospect to these people. But that is how our country has strengthened and become the envy of the whole world because of our form of government. But unfortunately, there is a movement, the progressive movement, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, and they are pushing for the establishment and have already succeeded in a lot of ways because the American people have had the old ostrich with the head in the sand approach to paying attention. It's unbelievable. People you want to talk about issues say, well, I don't even follow politics. I don't have anything to do with that. I just find it ridiculous. And it is ridiculous. But the reason it's ridiculous is because you, me, everybody you know does have a stake in this conversation because we are the people. This is our government. This is our country. And now you have this movement that is purposely trying to make it something it was never intended to be and take it in a direction that will be the end of America as we know it. And if you think I'm being ultra dramatic and overstating the case, I'm just here to tell you that is not the right conclusion, because that is exactly what's at stake in this election. And this movement is so nefarious and so powerful and backed with so much money that the entire projection of their views onto the other side to make them seem like the force that's disrupting everything, the constant threat you hear, threat to democracy. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Now, this is not a Donald Trump campaign program. Donald Trump has his flaws. Donald Trump is a major egotist. Donald Trump is a candidate that stands for constitutional principles. So the projection on him that he's going to be a dictator, he's going to be a threat to democracy, is consistent with a situation that we've had developed in this country of projection of your views to the other side, because the threat to democracy is already in motion. It has been in motion since the day that Joe Biden took the oath of office. It was begun when Barack Obama ascended to the presidency, a very slick, very well-spoken politician, but his underground agenda was to transform America, and he's used it in his rhetoric many times. That in his speech the night that he was proclaimed the winner of the election in 2012, Barack Obama made the rousing speech about the rising tide and the winds of change, and all of the backbone of that was the fact that it was time to take America away from the people and give it to its rightful owners, this elite class of Ivy League educated, we know much better than you, people that have been infested in the government with this kind of shadow movement in Washington for many, many years, building to this day, where this election is kind of the ultimate jumping off point. Because if this election does not go the way of Donald Trump and the Republicans, the Democrat majority is going to just intensify their grip on this country, and they're going to take it in a direction that I promise you, if anybody would use some of the time that they think they're busy and think about the future, not so much for you and me, but our children and our children's children and beyond. I think the choice is easy here. If you want America to be preserved and stay as it was intended to be, you vote one way, albeit if it's a turd sandwich or a giant douche, as opposed to the other way of really kind of passing the torch to this elitist group that talks about threats to democracy while they do things like on their own party not allow an individual from the most celebrated name in their party's political history, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to even compete for the nomination for president. They just basically declared, no, Joe Biden's our nominee. Nobody else is eligible to get in the race. It's too bad. Take it or leave it. It's going to be Joe Biden. Now, of course, that opens the subject of what we've been talking about for 2 years here since we launched Need to Know. If you pay any attention at all and you had any kind of knowledge of what's happening in Washington, it was obvious during the election in 2020, which was under emergency procedures due to COVID. There were such liberties taken and so many outrageous turns made because Americans weren't squarely focused on what was happening. And that's interesting because the voter totals of people that allegedly cast ballots was dramatically higher than it ever had been before. So this country, in the throes of a pandemic, which we could spend hours, I could do a 15-hour marathon on the, quote, pandemic and how conveniently timed it was and how its origins and where it came from, not a coincidence, but we don't need to harp on that. It's yesterday's news. But the bottom line is it was basically a Hail Mary by the people trying to preserve this movement, because Donald Trump's election in 2016 really threw them for a loop. And I said earlier, I misspoke. The first Obama election, of course, was in 2008. 2012, he doubled down with another term. But Trump elected in 2016 completely threw them for a loop because they were well on their way. And Hillary Clinton was the perfect closer. It was like a big sales job. She was the perfect high-pressure salesman to come in and seal the deal if she had had 4 years in Washington, because she was squarely on board with everything that was happening in this progressive, let's call it what it is, Marxist movement to, again, take power from the citizens and transform it to a handful of elites who know better than you how to run your life. You don't have the knowledge or responsibility or education or perspective to make your own decisions. We need people like Kamala Harris, which is laughable to start with, because I don't think it would take very long to count to the total number of her IQ. But the point of the matter is, Kamala Harris is the candidate, but she's not who's running for office here. She's running to be a placeholder, just like Joe Biden was a placeholder. And the powers behind the scenes, principally the Barack Obama group, who managed to ascend to 2 terms in the White House now are not eligible. Obama himself admitted in an interview 4 or 5 years ago that he thinks his ideal role would be to basically be in charge, like the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtain with his levers and pulleys and buttons, that he can manipulate events and not be in the public light. And that's exactly what we've got going on here. Not to say that Barack Obama is alone in this, but he is the lifeblood behind this progressive movement and the transformation of America. Do you really want America to be transformed? Do you want this to be a country that our founders purposely planned to it never being a country with a massive, all-powerful central government that tells you where you can live, what you can drive, what kind of appliances you can have in your house, what your occupational options are, has you on a bit of an assistance situation if necessary, to give you just the minimum you need to survive, not to be able to live any kind of satisfying life, but just to exist. You become secondary to the overall vision of a great global citizen, this kind of globalist agenda that we are just, we are insulting the rest of the world by supporting so many things and so many cultures and people. The United States is an embarrassment. Remember when Obama was elected, he went on the world apology tour for America. Once again, this is my government. It's your government. It's the people's government. I did not sanction Barack Obama representing my country, trotting around the world telling people America is it has acted badly and intervened where they don't belong. It's a good damn thing we've intervened where we don't belong, because let's look at Europe now, twice in the previous century, on the verge of total collapse and anarchy and a situation in 2 world wars where they were literally against the ropes, about to be knocked out, and the United States both times rallied to the cause, sent our most precious asset, our young people, over to another continent to fight a war that we needed to fight, because the nefarious forces that were just about to prevail were not going to stop there. It ultimately was going to come to our shores and become our war. But at that time, especially France, which was completely on the verge of total annihilation twice in the around 1917, 18, and again in the 1940s, and America came to the rescue both times. So we apologize, everybody, for sending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans to lose their lives to liberate an entire continent and keep a huge segment of people free. But now it's time to transform and become a global citizen. And the global citizenship involves partnerships with evil empires. I'll just go ahead and call them that. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. There's a lot of bad actors there. So to get in lockstep and join hands and sing Kumbaya with these regimes that have no interest in partnering with America, they just need to get America the hell out of the way. America is an impediment to their worldview. America has been the stabilizing rock that has kept this universe, this country, this continents, this earth in a situation of stability. America has been the shining city on the hill, and that's another subject that we're going to talk about. But the whole concept of American exceptionalism is resented by these elitists who don't understand the concept for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is because The American exceptionalism is not a braggadocious statement. It is not saying we're better than everybody else. That's how they interpret it. They don't understand the origins of American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism was actually adopted by people coming over, fleeing these oppressive societies and monarchies in the 16 and 1700s to try to establish this audacious experiment called America. They had a vision for a land where they could live, work, worship, and raise their families in a free society that was not under the bondage of these giant all-knowing in Europe, even more ridiculous than even the progressive movement, these monarchical situations where the title of the grand ruler of all these lands for so many centuries was just the next person in line in a particular family. Even if that person was an absolute zero or had no intellect and no ability or had nefarious purposes, that was the succession. These people fled that to establish a land where the people made decisions. It had been tried before in ancient Greece and ancient Roman society. Both times it had collapsed under the weight of eventually the power being seized away from people in representative government. And these people were determined, our founders were determined to prove that this experiment could work. So American intervention around the world does not need to be apologized for. It has really kept things as stable as possible through several centuries of tumult. And now these people that are trying to basically hijack your country, and that's a strong term, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. And most of them are pretty out front about it. Obama said the transfer that in recent remarks on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris, he said, you know, this is going to strike a terrible blow to the transformation of America if Donald Trump regains the White House. Donald Trump, a threat to democracy. Well, I started to mention the threats to democracy when you don't even let candidates run for the nomination in your own party, and your nominee is not functioning from a mental standpoint. He is strictly a teleprompter president. Everything he releases in terms of statements or policies are not coming from him. It's coming from the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, the inner circle of the Obama administration. Most of the cabinet and influential people that are calling the shots in the Biden administration are former Obama appointees. I've invented a new word, a Mayorkas. A Mayorkas is a mess that's so bad and so hard to clean up that it's virtually impossible. And the mess comes from not only ineptitude and ignorance and indifference, but also from an evil intent to really screw things up on purpose. And our Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has done a masterful job of creating the ultimate Mayorkas. The recent situations where Congress, always concerned to convene and have hearings and have fact-finding investigations, the most sad situation. There is nothing more useless. Remember the trend back in the old days of when people were giving each other pet rocks? Congress is the pet rocks of modern society because they go up and bluster and have all of these constant hearings and stir up all these problems and occupy all the times that they're up on the Hill justifying their existence, while really all they're doing is constantly running for re-election and trying to showcase themselves themselves when they do get opportunities to be on television to talk about issues that they supposedly have this great concern about. But it's just showcasing, it's just election to stay visible. It's just election to have the greatest gig ever invented, being in the government and basically living off the immense amount of tax dollars that is funded to the greatest growth industry in the history of the world, the federal government. So you've got all this blustering and all these things going on. But again, the projection of exactly what these people want to accomplish is cast back at Donald Trump, who has become one of the most remarkable populist politicians of all time. And a populist politician, which once again destroys the whole myth of this is just another Republican versus Democrat election. No, that's not what this is. This is an election between progressives and the people that don't think for themselves, that they have convinced that they have the right way to go. And the other side, represented amazingly by Donald Trump, who you would think would be aligned with the elites if he was going to use his immense wealth. You would think Elon Musk, one of the most progressive in a good way, and that's just the absolute thievery of a really good word. If you're a progressive person, that means you're making strides to move forward. You're making strides to improve everything. If you're making progress, that's a good thing. To call this movement progressive, that's the first word today that we're going to throw in the fire and say is absolutely a falsehood. This is not a progressive movement. There is nothing progressive. There is no progress made if you take power away from the citizens, if you take power away from the states, if you transfer power to the central organism of federal government that has grown by leaps and bounds. Take a drive up sometime up to Washington, Arlington, Virginia area. Look at all of the unbelievable opulence, the massive gated communities. Where I grew up originally in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, my grandmother lived in Annapolis. We used to drive out there just about every weekend, right off the Chesapeake Bay. It was just an idyllic childhood. Beautiful rolling hills, country, the magnificence of the Chesapeake Bay. The memories are just amazing. And in recent years, I tried to go back there and see so much of where my childhood was spent. Well, folks, it's gone. It's gated, gigantic communities with multi-million-dollar homes and just an infrastructure of Washington now being suburbs 45 minutes outside of town. That used to seem like it took forever to get from Rockville, Maryland out to Annapolis. Now it's a suburb. All of these major government bureaucrats, and this is not just limited to the elected officials. Government has bloated to the point where you've got some kind of administrator in charge of every department, every bureau, every agency. That person hires hundreds more people that all have their little corners of power. Washington, D.C. is an absolute morass of complete malfunction now, because you've got all kinds of people who think that they are absolutely the most important person in Washington. And these are the people behind the scenes writing the regulations, making the policies, sending it up the line, where the glorified people that are supposed to be doing all that work are simply just representing a spot where they get the ultimate opportunity to be seduced by all kinds of huge money entities, other parties that bring them to the spot where there's money flying around like crazy. When Harry Reid, the recently deceased senator, longtime president of the Senate from Nevada, 2 years before being elected to the U.S. Senate, Harry Reid declared bankruptcy. I don't remember what business he was in, but Harry was not succeeding. So I'm going to run for Senate. and he won and stayed there for more than 35 years. Harry Reid, bankrupt just a couple of years before he entered the Senate, walked away at the end of his term as a multi-millionaire worth more than $35 million. Now, why does that not outrage the American people? How does a public servant, and I always love that, when Harry Reid passed away, Harry Reid was the ultimate servant for the people of Nevada. Harry Reid was always there for the people of his state. It's absolute nonsense. The service is not public service, it's self-service. And if you're not appalled by that, then just keep stepping up to the plate and voting for the same old. American people who are in charge are responsible. It's like, well, this is ridiculous. The popularity rating for Congress overall is less than 20%. I think the last number I saw was something as bad as like 14% of people approve of Congress. And yet, year after year, election after election, guess what? We keep sending back the same people that we so vehemently disapprove of. What in the hell is going on here, people? You are in charge. If you don't like what's going on in Congress, you've got to make changes. You've got to send somebody else. But the perception is, and I don't know how this is developed, but it's got to be looked at. Everybody needs to look in the mirror for some serious self-examination. If you're going to step to the plate here in the election, which is coming right up, and vote for the same people that 86% of you say are not doing the job, what are you thinking? And I know what the perception is. Somehow we've developed this mentality. Well, I love our guy. He's doing a lot of things for our state. He's got a beautiful wife and family. He's a guy we can count on. So I'm voting for our guy. It's all the other bums you need to throw out of there. But that's not how it works. If your guy is just along for the ride, even if he's making noise, and it really annoys me that some of these guys that are masquerading as Republicans are really all on the same team with the other side, because it's not Democrat and Republican now. It's Washington against the average citizen. That's what the conflict is. It's Washington. It's massive, all-controlling, all-powerful central federal government, which the founders bent over backwards to try and write a constitution to prevent this from happening through checks and balances and elections and the opportunity for the common man to exercise his rights as the government of the United States, to have obviously all of us can't go to Washington and serve. So it is our responsibility to send representatives there. Even if you think your guy is awesome and deserves another term, if you're one of the 86% that says Congress is malfunctioned, is not working, you need to have the courage and the intestinal fortitude to vote your guy out and give somebody else a chance. Maybe you can send somebody up there that's going to say, this is all BS. I have to point out a great example of that is there's a member of Congress, and she is a flamethrower. She is constantly kind of getting herself in trouble because she speaks her mind. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, who is stamped by so many people as some kind of rabble-rousing, I'm trying to think of the right word, tyrant who is up in the Washington mix, stirring up trouble and dissension. Marjorie Taylor Greene is somebody who watched what was going on and has gone to Washington with the intent of shaking things up. I saw an extraordinary Marjorie Taylor Greene presentation at a campaign event back for failed Senate candidate Herschel Walker, but she was talking about experiences in Washington when she first got there, and talking about McCarthy, who ended up becoming the Speaker of the House. He was the minority leader of the House. And Marjorie tells the story of a bill that came that had basically 100% bipartisan support. The bill was about 16 or 17 pages. Really, what it was trying to create was some kind of federal children's museum in Washington that celebrated America and its history, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, who could be opposed to that? And it was supposed to be a quick right through Congress, right to the Senate, right to the president's desk. Boom, boom, boom. It's now a law. Let's build the museum. Marjorie Taylor Greene says, I did something that I don't think any of my colleagues do. She said, I read past the first couple pages of all the wonderful things this was going to bring. And when I got to the back pages, 4 or 5 of them, she said, I was absolutely appalled, because what that was calling for was an administration to oversee the Children's Museum, to make sure that all of these areas were addressed and always represented in this facility, including the 1620 mentality that America was actually formed a century and a half before it was formally adopted in 1776 by the execution of the Declaration of Independence. The whole first slaves arriving on the American on the American territory, 1620, and representations to people that have been oppressed. I mean, I wish I could remember all the other things. Of course, the plight of the indigenous people, the American Indians. Basically, it was going to be supposedly a place to celebrate American history, but also be heavily represented by all of these ancient situations where America supposedly just did so many people wrong here and was founded as a corrupt, evil nation. And the Children's Museum was being designed to basically showcase that history. It is consistent with the establishment in 1978 by the Jimmy Carter administration of the United States Department of Education. Education is not a federal government matter. Education is on the state and local level. It is a mandated by our founders situation that the federal government does not meddle in creating guidelines and requirements for education. That here now, almost 50 years later, we are really paying the price because our children are not learning how to be functional citizens. They're not learning the basics of all of the components that most of us at my age, all of us had access to, where you actually got an education and learned about math and science and geography and history and philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's not education, it's indoctrination. And this children's museum was going to be more of the same. She called Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, and said, Kevin, have you read this whole bill? And he said, of course I have. And she said, okay, let's talk about the back pages. And of course, he didn't know what she was referring to because he didn't read the damn bill. They're too busy going to cocktail parties and flying around the country to raise more money for their reelection. They're not interested in the minute details. And I had a brilliant boss who's actually a very close friend to Donald Trump, Phil Ruffin, who owns several hotels in Las Vegas, property all over the country, self-made guy, started with nothing, the absolute definition of the American dream. And when I worked for Phil, I had tons of ideas. He said, you're probably the brightest guy that's ever worked for our company, but you need to learn something, young man. The devil is in the details. And that's a simple cliche. It's repeated often, but have you ever stopped and think about what it means? That you have concepts, you have ideas, you have things that conceptually sound good, but if you don't have all of the details, you can't make an informed decision of whether to go forward. But McCarthy told her, look, this is just how things work in Washington. We let them put all that stuff in there, so it'll get consensus support. Nobody's going to to go to any strides to try and have those requirements fulfilled on those back pages. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was just outraged and said, that's ridiculous. We're passing the bill in its totality. We're not just passing the first 5 pages. She says, I'm not going to support this until there is a provision written in the back that if any of this stuff becomes enforced, if any of these inclusions that they list, that the bill will lose its funding and the project will not go forth. And he said, well, we can't do that. I've already promised them our entire delegation support on this bill. So she didn't let it go. She started calling colleagues. She started making them read the bill. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, they did reform and take a lot of that language out. But McCarthy and the powers that be had even gotten the proposed museum director to call her and say, hey, all that needed to be included in the legislation to get these extreme left-wing people on board. They insisted that be included. We have no intention to go that direction. But that still is just a perfect illustration of the cesspool that Washington is, that there's all these backroom deals. There's really no separation of Republican and Democrat. Certainly there are individuals that to take a stand in different areas, but basically it's one big happy organism, and they all have the same goal to keep getting reelected to the best gig in the world, where you can go in a person of modest means and come out a multimillionaire. So with all that being said, just to show you what scary direction we're going in this country, and I have so much more to talk about, but we only have a limited amount of time, of course, on each edition of Need to Know. But I want to tell you a quick story of an experience I had just a couple of weeks ago. I had gone to Indianapolis. One of my best friends of over 5 decades, his daughter was getting married in Indianapolis to a really outstanding young man whose family was just like the bride's family. A wedding is such a happy celebration because it's not just the bonding of two peoples, it's the affiliation of families and traditions. And, I was privileged to make some remarks at the reception. And I said, this is not just a wedding celebration. This is a celebration of life. And in that time on that trip, the headquarter hotel is in downtown Indianapolis. I'm going to name it because it's the premier brand of the Hilton chain, the Conrad, which is named after the founder of Hilton Hotels, Conrad Hilton, who first innovated the entire hotel business. Another guy who lived the American dream, took a pittance of money that he had, invested it into his first lodging property, and completely transformed that whole industry from what basically was were dirty boarding houses into luxury places. They were the first buildings in the country to have central air conditioning. Conrad Hilton was a brilliant man, but the Conrad chain in Indianapolis, fabulous hotel. So well, the Indianapolis downtown is just a brilliant conception. It's an amazing place. But I'm sitting there with longtime friends of mine from Atlanta, where I told you I was born in the Washington, D.C. area. We moved to Atlanta when it was booming in the late 60s. I was still a small child, but I made associations with guys and I shouldn't say guys, people, but the 4 guys who became my best friends to this day are still my best friends. All those years removed, all of them still live in the Atlanta area. I was the only one stupid enough to leave. But the bottom line is, in catching up with them in the lounge, in the Conrad, and to their defense, this was not their lounge. It was a well-known company of steakhouses, and this was the bar in that, and I won't mention that name, but just to protect the innocent, I guess. But we're having a beer or two or three, and we'd sat there and we're catching up. And of course, the situation turned to discussions about what was happening in our country, what was happening in the Middle East, which is a whole nother subject here. There's so many things I want to get into, but I don't have a 5-hour show here. The bottom line is we started talking. We tend to get a little bit loud. I blame that on myself. My friends learned early on if they were going to get a word in edgewise, they probably needed to learn how to speak up and assert themselves, because Kip Keefer does not yield the stage very often. Not one of my better attributes, but it does lead to very animated conversations. And we were talking about the nonsensity of this administration having the absolute gall to tell people in the Middle East, principally Israel, who has been a lockstep affiliate with the United States since their formation in 1948, to give Israel directives from this administration to let's approach a diplomatic solution to this problem. Well, let me remind you what this problem was. On October 7th, 2023, a major commando force of Hamas killers descended on southern Israel, just bedroom communities, neighborhoods, a music festival, and they arbitrarily slaughtered. Just brutally killed average women, men, children, old people, little girls and women were savagely raped, and if not killed, left in just an utter state of disarray. I mean, it was the most abominable thing since the early part of world history, where these barbarians would go into areas and what would be called sack civilizations with this kind of brutal behavior. The result between 1250 and 1350, I don't have the exact number, Israelis murdered. This was not a war situation. This was not against a military force. These were killers dispatched to Israel to murder senselessly, rape, and completely torture just every vulnerable citizen. People just mass executed. It was one of the great abominations in the modern history of the world. And yet you have these voices saying, well, this is just an expression of the frustration of the Palestinian people, because Israel is an oppressive society that has run them out of their country, occupied their territory, which couldn't be further from the truth. That was territory, was never Palestinian exclusively. If you know anything about history, Israel was a melting pot of three different faiths: Jews, Christians, and Muslims. That's why the tug of war for Jerusalem always continues, because all three of those religions consider that sacred ground. And that's at the root of all of this problem. And it's been going on since the beginning of civilization, basically. Every major power has occupied that territory at one time or another. And in 1948, after World War II, so many displaced Jews in Europe after the Holocaust, basically the English, with the support of the Americans and the other allies, sanctioned that Israel would become the Jewish state. Anyway, the point is, we got into some pretty animated conversation of how absurd and how insulting it was for our administration, Biden and Blinken and Nod and Sullivan. Nod's not really in there. That goes with Blinken. They were going over begging Netanyahu, look, do not take aggressive action. You're going to escalate this thing into a terrible situation. Ignoring the fact that Netanyahu was in the ultimate terrible situation. The existence of his country was on the line. This was not a situation that diplomacy was required. This required a complete reaction to make sure that what happened will never happen again. And you can't have these funded by Iran proxy fighting forces on your northern and southern border, aka Hezbollah and Hamas, who are existing with the idea, the principle, the creed that they are going to drive the Jewish population in Israel from the river to the sea, basically meaning that they are going to eliminate their existence. That's what they live for. That's the genocide that they are pledged to. And you've got idiots in the street here screaming about genocide of the Palestinian people. Israel has not raided the Gaza area and indiscriminately murdered citizens, which is being alleged now that they're just callously killing off tens of thousands of Palestinians. Of course, the numbers we get are from the Ministry of Health, which is a bureau that is completely controlled and a propaganda branch of the Hamas terrorist movement. Let me ask you a question, folks. Let me finish that point first. You'll have an incursion by Israeli military. These Hamas jackals hide amongst the population in neighborhoods, try to use all the abused Palestinian people as human shields. And if there are casualties, they are inflated 10, 15, 50 times, 100 times more than the actual casualties by the Hamas Ministry of Health, and which was called the Gaza Ministry of Health. But the Ministry of Health is propaganda. They throw out a number, and I was watching a local news program here one night, and the girl reading the teleprompter said, and Israeli action resulted in the death of 462 Palestinian innocent civilians. That number does not come from a credible source, and yet we report on it like it's absolute fact. I mean, there is a lunacy warrant that needs to be issued. But let me finish the point. So we're getting pretty animated about that and other subjects. This little dweeby guy comes over wearing a cheap suit and kind of acting the part of exactly who you would think would intervene. And he said, I forgot the name, the lounge manager here. I'm going to have to ask you all to tone down your rhetoric and your conversation. It's getting loud. And frankly, a lot of people here find it offensive. Okay, so I am not a person that stands up on a soapbox and makes public statements and tells people what to think. The whole premise of this show is I want everybody to think for themselves. But I was not delivering misinformation. I was putting it in perspective, as were my friends, as we had a animated discussion. I'll admit that. But it's in a public place. And I asked him one question. I said, well, pardon me, I thought we were in America here. And he goes, that's not the point. Your opinions are not shared by everybody in this room. Well, my next comment to him was, well, everybody in this room has the right to do exactly what we're doing and share their opinions in public. That is what the First Amendment, the backbone of this country, the Constitution, which the threat to democracy is the trampling of the Constitution to pick and choose and even update provisions of the Constitution to fit the agenda that these people want to achieve. And I want you to really consider that as you think about how to vote in this election. Because if we don't have the right to free speech amongst our own colleagues in a public place, we have reached a dark avenue of jumping off into something that nobody wants to live with, because the next step in that process would be somebody coming and putting handcuffs on me and my friends and leading us away because we are expressing opinions that may offend somebody. We were not using any kind of foul language. We were not referring to anybody in any unflattering terms. We were stating opinions on facts that we were witnessing in our country and around the world. That is a First Amendment right. That is America. And that is what the lounge manager and all of these people that want to transform your country are trying to accomplish. That very goal. And you had better be aware of that before you stamp your ballot for the candidate who is just a figurehead that's going to allow this movement, this insidious movement, to continue to wield the web that once it's established, America is not going to be able to recover from. With that ominous message and an inspirational message of hope that all of you will understand what's on the line here. And even if you have to hold your nose, if you totally detest Donald Trump as a person, he's not running for Miss Congeniality. He's already had a term. He is not a threat to democracy. He is a constitutionalist like everyone supporting him. And if you believe in America and you believe in the Constitution and you believe that America is exceptional because our principles, founding principles, are Judeo-Christian, and this party is also determined to eliminate that. Just listen to Kamala Harris's comments the other night when somebody dared yell "Jesus is Lord" at her speech, her rally. She says, I think you got the wrong rally. You stopped in at the wrong place. I think you need to move down the street where it's a lot smaller crowd. It's the reason they muzzled her and kept her out of the public view, really wouldn't let her speak, because in that one statement, she reveals so much of her attitude against the founding principles, which again are Judeo-Christian based. American exceptionalism is not braggadocious. It is a bar set so high that all of us in our country need to aspire to achieve it. America needs to be the shining city on the hill. It needs to be exceptional for the world to be stable, peaceful, safe, and secure for me, for you, for our children, and for all of our future grandchildren and their children. Thanks for listening to Need to Know. Back next week with more. Hope everybody has a great week, and think about what I said here. Again, I'm not telling you what to think or how to think. I'm telling you, think for yourself and make your rightful conclusion. Thank you, everybody. Kip Keefer signing off here on Need to Know.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.